Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Hari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Hari Yashodanandana Brajadana Rangana Yashodanandana Brajadana Rangana Jamuna Tiravana Jamuna Tiravana Tari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Hari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Hari Yashodanandana Brajadana Rangana Yashodanandana Brajadana Rangana Jamuna Tiravana Tari Jamuna Tiravana Tari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe. Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Gaura Pimanandi, Jayam Vishnupada Paramahamsa, Pri Vradgacharya Stotra Satya, Sri Simad, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhai Charan Arvind Bhaktivedanta Swami, Sri Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vinaki, Iskon Diviti, Founder Acharyas Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada Ki, Namacharya Sri Haridas Thakur Ki, Samavata Bhaktivedanta Ki, Hare Ram Sankirtan Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Nithai Gauda Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru, to Sri Gauranga, all glories to Sri Prabhupada. Om Agyanati Mirandasya Gyananjana Sarakaya Taksurun Meritam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Bandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Parakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Ditam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Sri Visakanditam Sya He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisa Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kantana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vansakalpa Tarubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavinebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Taram Chaiva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, let us first offer respectful obeisances unto Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayana Rishi, the supremest human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta prayasa badrishu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttamasloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. By regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam and rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed practically to nil, and loving devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, who is praised with transcendental songs, becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Puranam Brahmasamritam Tamasloka Charitam Chakara Bhagavan Rishi Nishraya Sayalokasya Dhanyam Swasyanam Mahat. This Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Grantaraj, the king of all Vedic literatures, is the literary incarnation of God. It is compiled by the incarnation of God, the Srila Vyasadeva. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhara, Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Hare Rama,
Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Mukham karoti vataram pangom langayate girim yat kripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. Yat kripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. Hare Krishna. Welcome to our Bhagavatam class, continuing second canto, second chapter, entitled The Lord in the Heart. And today we are doing text number 28. Yes. Tato Vishesham Pratipadya Nirbhayas Tenat Manapo Anala Murtir Atparam Jyotirmayo Vayum Upetya. Kali Vayu Atmana Kam Brihad Atma Lingam Tato Vishesham Pratipadya Nirbhayas
Tato Vishesham Pratipadya Nirbhayas
Tenat Manapo Nala Murtir Atvaran Jyotirmayo Vayum Upetya Kale Vayu Atmanakam Brihad Atmalingam Tato Vishesham Pratipadya Nirbhayas Tenat Manapo Nala Murtir Atvaram Jyotirmayo Vayumupetya Kale Vayu. Oh, okay. Vayatmana Kambrihad Atma Lingam Tato Vishesham Pratipadya Nirbhayas Tenatmana Ponala Murtir Atvaran Jyotirmayo Vayum Upetya Kale Vayatmana Kambrihad Atmalingam Tato Vishesham Pratipadya Nirbhayas Tenatmana Ponala Murtira Advan Jyotirmayo Vayum Upetya Kale Vayu Atmanakam Brihad Atmalingam. Okay. Tataha. Thereafter. Vishesham. Particularly. Pratipadya. By obtaining. Nirbhayaha. Without any doubt. Tena, by that. Atmana, pure self. Apa, water. Anala, fire. Murtihi, forms. Atvaran, by surpassing. Okay. Jyotimayaha. Jyotirmayaha, effulgent. Vayum, atmosphere. Upetya, having reached there. Kali, in due course of time. Vayu, air. Atmana, by the self. Kam, eternal, ethereal. Yeah. Brihat, great. Atmalingam, the real form. of the self.
the real form of the self.
A translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. After reaching Satyaloka, the devotee is specifically able to be incorporated fearlessly by the subtle body in an identity similar to that of the gross body. And one after another, he gradually attains the stages of existence from earthly to watery, fiery, glowing, and airy, until he reaches the ethereal stage. You kindly repeat after me. After reaching Satyaloka, the devotee is specifically able to be incorporated fearlessly by the subtle body in an identity similar to that of the gross body. And one after another, he gradually attains stages of existence from earthly to watery, fiery, glowing and airy, until he reaches the ethereal stage. Purport. Anyone who can reach Brahmaloka or Satyaloka by dint of spiritual perfection and practice is qualified to attain three different types of perfection. One who has attained a specific planet by dint of pious activities attains places in terms of his comparative pious activities. One who has attained the place by dint of virat or Hiranyagarbha worship is liberated along with the liberation of Brahma. But one who attains the place by dint of devotional service is specifically mentioned here in relation to how he can penetrate into the different coverings of the universe and thus ultimately disclose his spiritual identity in the absolute atmosphere of supreme existence. So it depends on consciousness. The purport continues. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, all the universes are clustered together, up and down, and each and every one of them is separately sevenfold covered. The watery portion is beyond the sevenfold coverings, and each covering is 10 times more expansive than the present covering. The personality of Godhead, who creates all such universes by his breathing period, lies above the cluster of the universes. The water of the causal ocean is differently situated than the covering water of the universe. The water that serves as covering for the universe is material, whereas the water of the causal ocean is spiritual. As such, the watery covering mentioned herein is considered to be the false egoistic covering of all living entities, and the gradual process of liberation from the material coverings, one after another, as mentioned herein, is the gradual process of being liberated from false egoistic conceptions of the material gross body, and then being absorbed in the identification of the subtle body till the attainment of the pure spiritual body in the absolute realm of the kingdom of God. Srila Sridhar Swami confirms that a part of the material nature, after being initiated by the Lord, is known as the Mahatattva. A fractional portion of the Mahatattva is called the false ego. A portion of the false ego is the vibration of sound, and a portion of sound is atmospheric air. A portion of the airy atmosphere is turned into forms, and the forms constitute the power of electricity or heat. Heat produces the smell of the aroma of the earth, and the green earth is produced by such aroma. And all these combined together constitute the cosmic manifestation, the cosmic phenomena. The extent of the cosmic phenomenon is calculated to be diametrically, both ways, 4 billion miles. Then the coverings of the universe begin. The first stratum of the covering is calculated to extend 80 million miles, and the subsequent coverings of the universe are respectively of fire, effulgence, air, and ether, one after another, each extending 10 times further than the previous. The fearless devotee of the Lord penetrates each one of them and ultimately reaches the absolute atmosphere where everything is of one and the same spiritual identity. Then the devotee enters one of the Vaikuntha planets where he assumes exactly the same form of the Lord and engages in the loving transcendental service of the Lord. That is the highest perfection of devotional service. Beyond this, there is nothing to be desired or achieved by the perfect yogi. Yeah, very detailed description. We'll just read the verse again. After reaching Satyaloka, the devotee is specifically able to be incorporated fearlessly by the subtle body in an identity similar to that of the gross body. And one after another, he gradually attains stages of existence from earthly to watery, fiery, glowing, and airy, until he reaches the ethereal stage. So we are in a very tight prison house of the material world, as can be seen by the description here. This particular planet that we live on, that we live in, is considered to be the smallest planet of the universe. Our universe is also the smallest universe, but as we can see here, there are huge distances. It mentions the whole cosmic phenomenon here is calculated. It's amazing how these are, just like Bhagavatam gives, the distance between the earth and the moon, the distance between the earth and the sun, the distance between the different planets. This was written thousands of years ago. How this is possible. So there are, and those distances are in keeping with the calculated distances of modern science. Of course, the Bhagavatam goes beyond by mentioning that once we come to the end of this universe, then the different coverings of the universe begin. And each that first covering, each of the elements makes up one of the coverings, and that first covering, here it is mentioned, is 80 million miles. 80 million miles. and each and every other, yeah. And from the description here, from the gross to the subtle, each extending 10 times further than the previous. But Prabhupada mentions how one who is a devotee surrendered to the Lord, the fearless devotee, penetrates each one of them and ultimately reaches the absolute atmosphere where everything is of one and the same spiritual identity. Very difficult for us to conceive how to exit the material even how to leave this body. We are also having different coverings. We were reading about the different circulations or the different life air within the body, and these function in a particular way when we are, let's say, conscious, but there's a whole change that starts to take place just before one leaves the body. Of course, sometimes it happens very quickly because people, if someone is in an accident, he will leave the body very quickly. So this is the what is being described here is the whole constitution or construction of the material world, and how the living entities are entrapped within this material world, and yeah. In other words, how one needs to go from just like the material elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, they begin from the gross and gradually become more and more subtle. Even within the gross material body, earth is the most, the grossest manifestation. More subtle, water. More subtle than water, air. Earth, water, fire. After fire is air and ether. Earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Then even more subtle, the mind, intelligence, and ego. So it's a very, very involved situation in which we find ourselves. So it means that actually the more we identify with the gross, the more we remain under the gross level, then the less we can actually understand our position. Therefore, the different practices of yoga enable one to grow from the gross level to the more subtle level. And of course, the process of of devotional service helps one to reach the topmost subtle level, which is described here and will be described more in the verses to come. We can just get a little glimpse of how how involved, how intricate is this material creation. Next verse is continuing this description. It's a very short purport, so we can read that also. So text 29. Granena gandham rasanena vai rasam rupam cha drisya swasanam tvachaiva srotrena chopetya nabho ganatvam pranena chakutim upaiti yogi. The translation: the devotee thus surpasses the subtle objects of different senses, like aroma by smelling, the palate by tasting, vision by seeing forms, touch by contacting, the vibrations of the ear by ethereal identification, and the sense organs by material activities. I purport: beyond the sky there are subtle coverings resembling the elementary coverings of the universes. The gross coverings are a development of partial ingredients of the subtle causes. So the yogi or devotee, along with liquidation of the gross elements, relinquishes the subtle causes like aroma by smelling, the pure spiritual spark, the living entity, and thus becomes completely cleansed of all material contamination to become eligible for entrance into the kingdom of God. So to return to the spiritual world, to enter the kingdom of God, to enter Vaikuntha planets, all of these coverings, and now we're seeing the different coverings of the universe, all of these coverings that we are on a smaller level, they are they are all, we can say, covering the identity of the spirit soul. It means that the word Durga, which is describing the material world, which means a prison house, gives us an idea of how very much imprisoned we are in this material body, how very much imprisoned we are in this material world. And unless one cultivates transcendental knowledge, one remains within this prison house of the material world. And one needs to cleanse oneself completely of all of these different coverings. Means one needs to disidentify oneself, no longer identify oneself with this material body. And only when one is fully purified in this way, does he does the living entity become again qualified to enter to the spiritual world. Yeah. The description will continue. Yeah. Anything?
Yeah. For the devotee also same process, he has to go through the layers. This explain devotee.
Yes, it mentions about devotee. Whether a devotee needs to follow the same process. All living entities in the material world are under the influence of all of these material elements and material coverings. But a devotee does not, because one is fully surrendered to the Lord. If one comes to the proper understanding that that will be discussed in the verses to come, a fully surrendered soul, servant of Krishna, then this explanation here is just showing us how deeply involved we are when we come in this material world, how deeply entangled the living entity becomes. But for a devotee, although the same thing is there, all living entities are entrapped within this whole arrangement that we are reading about. But a devotee, different from others, does not leave the material world in a mechanical way. Others who are transcendentalists, yogis in particular, they attempt to go out. They are devotees, but not pure devotees, unless one knows about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his relationship with him. One is not yet complete in his realization and cannot actually enter into the Vaikuntha planets. So others are also described as devotees because there are different categories or different levels of devotees. Those who are in full knowledge of their identity, those who have developed, that is actually the Bhagavatam is of course especially focused on this. Those who are by the cultivation of this knowledge fortunate to begin awakening their identity or their relationship with Krishna, then for them this whole mechanical process is bypassed. We don't have to be worried about, how when I leave this body, how I'm going to go back to Krishna. Because in the spiritual world, the primary consciousness and the primary activity is knowing that we are servants of Krishna, and the primary activity is devotional service. So if one is in that consciousness, if one is engaged in devotional activities, therefore as it is explained actually by our acharyas, one who is in that consciousness is already in Vaikuntha consciousness, isn't it? So the the transfer to the spiritual world is practically, occurs instantly. So there is a major difference between someone who is actually in that consciousness by hearing, in particular, from the pages of the Bhagavatam, and that's why the Bhagavatam is so revered and worshipable, because the Bhagavatam is non-different than Krishna, non-different from the spiritual world. It is describing the spiritual world and the simple process to again re-enter the spiritual world by reawakening our spiritual identity. So we don't have to be, although this is quite involved, all of these different coverings, these different layers. It's like for most people, it's very difficult to deal with. So one who is, this will be explained in the verses to come, one who is fully surrendered to the process which is described in the both Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, then for such a person, the way back home, back to Godhead, or the path, is not something that is complicated. We, as devotees, simply should concern ourselves with developing this higher consciousness that that Prabhupada has revealed to us, has explained to us as Krishna consciousness, by engaging more and more in the activities of bhakti or devotional service. We will close here for now. Jai Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai, Sri Prabhupada ki Gaura Pimanandi.